Hi, this is Mr. Mullaney. This is a lesson recap of our lesson about the movement for women's rights in the 1800s. So let's talk about cultural and legal limits on women. After all, why would you have a movement for women's rights if women have rights? But in a lot of ways, they don't. So women are entering the workforce. This is because of industrialization and it's because of urbanization. Great topic to research on this is the Mills of Lowell, Massachusetts. There you see how women and children are treated in industrial textile factories at this time very, very harshly. All right, so women don't have the right to vote. In most states, women cannot own property. Women cannot make a will. And they're not even allowed to keep money they earned. In theory, the money that women earn is the property of their father or of their husband. So we have Catherine Beecher. She's one of the first leaders. However, she's more domestically inclined, and she also trains women in teaching. Teaching is considered a profession that respectable women can join. You can be a respectable woman and be a teacher. So when we talk about public roles, two big fronts: the fight for abolition and the women's rights movement. So women are a big part. Northern women are a huge part, the dominant part, really, as far as numbers, of the Northern abolitionist movement. However, they're treated as second-class citizens in the abolitionist movement. The men of the movement tell them, okay, you're at our meeting, keep your mouth closed, sit in the back. And so it was really, they were second-class citizens within the abolitionist movement. By the way, the abolitionists, the most progressive people in the country at the time. So if they were treating women this way, you knew the country as a whole was treating them rather poorly. From there, in 1840, there was a women's rights, there was an anti-slavery convention, and women were not allowed to participate. So that's pretty bad. All right, we talked about a number of leaders in class, from Grimke to Child to Stowe to Jacobs to Sojourner Truth. The big one that we go into was Harriet Beecher Stowe, especially because in our next unit, when we start to talk about the Union starting to rip apart over slavery, her work, Uncle Tom's Cabin, is rather integral to that. But women were working as writers. They were advocating for themselves. They were publishing at this time. We watched a brief clip about Harriet Beecher Stowe from the abolitionists on PBS. About what brought her into the fight against slavery. She was from Ohio. She ventured across the border between free and slave, the Ohio River, that brought her into Kentucky, as I adjust my glasses real quick. She witnessed a slave auction and was horrified. She also lost a son of her own, so that kind of made her empathize with the mothers of slaves as families were torn apart. All right, some more leaders: Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Blackwell, Mitchell, Fuller. Women making big accomplishments at this time. But again, the fight for women's rights is a very, very difficult one in the 1800s in this country. You want to think about the temperance movement versus the women's movement. The temperance movement gets laws on the books, laws that exist in many cases to this day, as we've discussed. The women's movement, not so much. So that really tells you the men of America at this time were much more inclined to give up alcohol than they were to give women more rights, especially voting rights. We get the Seneca Falls Convention. Very important to know with the Seneca Falls Convention. It's the first organized women's rights convention in this country. What does it accomplish? Not much. Women's rights does not get advanced very far in the years after 1848, does not trigger much support. However, it's important because it's the first. You don't have women's rights made without somebody meeting, without somebody issuing a declaration of sentiments. So it's the first time this happens. If this doesn't happen in 1848, then maybe it happens 1858 or 1870, and that the wait is longer and longer. It was long enough as it was, and having that convention at least gets the ball rolling. So it's significant, not because of what it accomplishes, but because it's the first time people gather in this country to advocate for women's rights and for women's suffrage. All right, and lastly, we ended with a brief clip of Hillary Clinton. This was not meant to be a campaign advertisement, but it's meant to talk about how Seneca Falls, important to this day. She mentioned it in her speech at the 2008 Democratic Convention about how her mother, when her mother was born, women could not vote, and yet her daughter was able to cast a vote for her as president of the United States. Now, of course, should Hillary Clinton win in 2016, that will notch up our female president counter all the way up to 1. But at least you have, a major contender in both 08 and 16. And what New Yorker inspires her? She talks about Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman did settle in upstate New York, which was a relative hotbed of abolitionism, and she talked about what Harriet Tubman did and how Harriet Tubman fought to free slaves and advance women's rights. So that is our brief lesson recap, the movement for women's rights.